I, 21 male, have an older brother, Dave, fake name, that has always been a jerk to me. There's only a 1-year gap between us, but he liked to beat me up when we were kids, and he always acted like anything that was mine was also his. He was also somewhat the golden child, which made me miserable. So no surprise I moved out at 18. My uncle is a now retired police officer, and he took me in after I left home. He even hooked me up with a decommissioned Crown Vic. I absolutely love that car. I don't know why, but Dave hated the fact I had that car. He drove 3 beater cars into the ground while my Crown Vic kept chugging along. Well after his 3rd beater finally died when he drove it into a pole, he asked to borrow my car. I had a bad feeling and said I wasn't going to do that. He called me entitled and said he needed a car to get to work. I told him to take the bus because I know how he drives and my Crown Vic was off limits. My parents called me after that and told me to just lend him my car. I said I won't no matter what they say. I rely on the car and need it as well since it's my personal transportation. Dave wasn't the only one in the world with a job he needed to get to. My uncle congratulated me for standing up to them and gave me a high five. A few days later, when I got off work, the car wasn't where I parked it. I called my brother's cell, but he didn't pick up. Then I called my parents and asked them if he took my car. They denied it. So I said I was going to call the cops, and then they admitted he'd borrowed it because he needed it. I told them he better bring it back right now or I'll have police looking for him. They called me a jerk and then phoned Dave to bring my car back. He showed back up in the parking lot in my car 20 minutes later. I demanded to know how he stole my car, and he held up a set of police Crown Vic keys he'd bought online. Some were made universal. I told him if he ever stole my car again, I'd have him arrested. Then he had the audacity to ask for a ride home. I told him he made me wait in the December cold after stealing my car so he could walk. He called me a jerk before I drove away. After that, my uncle installed a tracking device in the car. When Christmas Day came, I was celebrating with my family like every year. The roads were cold and icy, so I had to be very careful while driving. By now, you're probably clued in on the title. Yeah, Dave borrowed my car again during the Christmas party. Apparently, he decided he was gonna go pick up a friend and figured I wouldn't notice. But I did when I looked out the front window and saw my car was missing. I pulled up the tracking app and saw he was a few miles away. Then called his cell to yell at him. Everyone in the party saw this and asked what was going on. I said Dave stole my car again. And my uncle confirmed it wasn't the first time. Dave told me over the phone to screw off and he'd be back soon. I said he better not have been drinking, but he just hung up on me. Well, while I was watching the tracker app, the dot stopped and didn't move for a while. Soon, we got a panicked call from Dave asking for help. He'd crashed the car because he couldn't handle the icy roads and he wasn't used to a rear-wheel drive vehicle. So we piled in my parents' minivan and followed the tracker. We found Dave by the road and my Crown Vic nose deep in a snow-filled ditch. My uncle was furious as it was formerly a car of his department, and I was mad as hell at Dave for stealing my car again. My parents wanted me to let it go, but I said enough was enough and was going to call the police. Dave begged me not to because he really had been drinking before and that he would get a DUI. I said he was going to pay me back for my damned car then or I'd sue him. Well, as luck would have it, police were already aware of the accident and were driving in to check on the scene. Someone else had called them, I guess. My parents tried to say that I was the one driving the car and they were just there to help me. I said that wasn't true and my uncle backed me up. In fact, one of the cops that was there recognized my uncle and they had a chat. Then they went to Dave and asked to see his license, which I then found out was suspended after he'd crashed his previous car. Then they breath tested him. He wound up with cuffs slapped in his wrists while my mother was crying and begging the police not to take him away. But the officer just said that she and my dad could get arrested too for lying to the police. That shut my parents up, and we got back in the minivan. The Christmas party ended early, and my parents drove me and my uncle home since he rode with me. They didn't say much to either of us the whole drive and just sped away as soon as we were out of their van. They nearly slipped off the road themselves doing that. My brother was let out of jail the next day, and he looked so scared that he was practically crying. The cops there had roughed him up a bit while talking about prison. That's when my uncle started cracking up and revealed to us that his friends in the department never filed the DUI and just the charge for the suspended license, which was about a $600 fine. My uncle said he just wanted to teach Dave a lesson, and this would be the one and only time he'd ever get his help. Dave then apologized to me and said he'd pay to have my Crown Vic fixed and would never touch it again. When it got pulled out of the ditch, the front-end damage was actually minor. It needs a new front bumper, a headlight, and a grille. The damage was just superficial, thankfully. My parents have pretty much glossed over the whole incident and act like it didn't happen. Dave gave me the extra Crown Vic keys he'd bought online and said this has taught him a lesson he won't soon forget. This all went down yesterday. My brother promised he'd pay for the damage to my car, and he kept that promise. The body shop guy cut me a deal at a fair price for replacing the damaged front-end parts on my Crown Vic. He just asked if I cared whether or not they were OEM. I told him I didn't care if they were OEM as the car is far from new and I didn't need the bill to get too high. I'd thought that the damage was only cosmetic, but there was some minor damage the body shop will need to pull out. But it's not frame damage and is an easy job to straighten out, they told me. There was some minor damage to the fender panels, but they said they're easy to fix, especially since I don't care that they aren't perfect. And the new parts will be painted in a matching color. So that's good? My brother willingly paid cash in advance to the body shop after getting the quote from them. He seemed all too eager to hand the money over and politely bid me goodbye. I won't say how much it was, but it definitely hurt his savings, especially after the fine he had to pay for driving without a license. He was wanting to get a replacement car, but he won't have one till his license suspension is over anyway, and I don't know when that'll be. But I think it's gonna be a good while. Anyway, my parents had given my brother a ride to the body shop, and as soon as he was out the door, they stayed and admonished me for making him spend all his money fixing my car. I imagine they were about to say something about how I should have just lent my car to him to begin with and how this all would have been prevented if I had, but something in me snapped and I cut them off. And that's when it spilled out. I called them out on everything that came to mind. All of the favoritism. How they act like my brother has always been more important. How I had to move in with my uncle just to escape their unfair treatment. How they let my brother steal my car and then tried to lie to me until I threatened them with the police. How they themselves tried to lie to police by saying I was the one driving when my brother crashed my Crown Vic. And so much more. And I ended it all with saying how stupid it was that they were mad at me for making my brother pay for the damage that he caused by stealing my car on Christmas Day and driving it without a license and while intoxicated. By the time I finally stopped, I was nearly out of breath. My mother was crying. My father was red in the face and looked like he was about to explode. Then he just took my mother by the hand and started to walk out. But some guy, I don't know who, was sitting near the door and he blurted out, "You guys are narcissists." Well, that was enough to set my father over the edge as he started attacking the guy. My father is not a small man, and he knows how to throw a punch. So he started beating the poor guy like a mad gorilla. I yelled for the clerk to call the cops, and they did. My father heard that and bolted out the door and drove off. He actually left my mother behind crying in the lobby. Police had to pick him up at home, and he surprisingly cooperated when he was arrested. But he's looking at charges for assault. The guy he beat up suffered a very swollen black eye and a possible broken nose and concussion. I was there when they were loading him into the ambulance to get him to the hospital. My uncle is saying it was about time my dad tasted some karma, and my brother is doing everything he can to stay out of it. This is not how I thought this was all going to go down. A girl I worked with, let's call her Karen, because why not? And I were working in our own little corner of fast food hell. The truck had just come in, so the assistant manager, AM, was outside. I was in the drive-thru, and Karen was at the front counter. We got a bit of a rush, and Karen said she needed change. I was the senior crew member, so I was in charge. I had to run outside to see AM. AM trusted me, so she gave me the keys. I got the change out of the safe, closed and locked the safe, then gave AM her keys back. The next day, I got called into the office by the store manager. SM turns out $100 was missing, and Karen said she'd seen me pocket it out of her drawer. I told SM that I was innocent. I had worked there for years, and my drawers were almost never short, and if they were, it was by mere pennies. There were no cameras on the front counter. It was her word against mine. SM didn't like me, so I was let go. I walked out and was devastated. We lived in a small, mostly white town. I was one of the few POC, the only POC at that particular restaurant, and I was a single mom. On top of all that, I was in a vicious custody battle with my soon-to-be ex-husband. He only wanted the kids so he wouldn't have to pay child support. His genius, GF, screamed that at me when I wouldn't put them on my cell phone plan. This was the last thing I needed. I started looking for a new job. 2 days later, SM called me in and told me that because it was a she-said deal that I wasn't let go. No idea where I'd gotten that idea from, but I would be put in the kitchen to work. Fine. I go to work in the kitchen, and I hear from the rumor mill that another $100 turned up missing from Karen's drawer the day after I was let go, and she accused another poor innocent person of stealing it. Too bad it was SM's daughter, who was an all-around awesome person, always did her job and rarely complained. Not even a week later, they needed me to fill in on a register and Karen tried to set me up again. But I had witnesses and I refused to touch her drawer. Fool me once. This was on a Tuesday. That Friday, I was called in early because Karen called in. She told AM that her mother-in-law, who babysat the kid, was sick and in the hospital, and that she had gone to the hospital to sit with her. I got there and was told that under no circumstance was I to read the newspaper. I couldn't, because they'd all been taken out of the dispenser. Well, they couldn't stop the customers from reading the paper. My lawyer, who ate breakfast there regularly and knew Karen, showed us what our managers hadn't wanted us to see. Karen, her husband and mother-in-law, had been arrested for selling cocaine from the house they rented in our tiny town. She ended up getting fired. She got evicted. And her kids had been taken into state custody because, according to the paper, they were selling it right in front of the kids. Horrible people.